Hello, welcome to week 3. So today we are finishing up Midnight Robber. Make sure that you finish the book by the end of this week. That way it'll be done and you'll be able to write on it for the close reading paper that's due at the end of next week, right? The 15th is the close reading paper, so that's the next one. Um, as far as our schedule coming up, Wednesday is when we get to view a film, screen a film instead of reading a book. So we'll do that in class. Make sure that you're there. I'll bring popcorn, and we'll move on from there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Hopkinson's inclusion of Indigenous themes and Indigenous peoples in her novel Midnight Robber. Now, she goes through and makes this decision to include an entire kind of Indigenous culture. Now, last Wednesday, we already talked about kind of who's all included in the diversity of the Caribbean islands with Afro-Caribbean, Indo-Caribbean, and the indigenous peoples. Um, so when we think about what's included and why that's included, what effects does that have on the novel? What effects does that have on the main character's development? And kind of how does that place Tantan? Once again, if we go back to Walker's original discussion about body politics, does giving Tantan some of that indigenous culture and indigenous heritage, which Hopkinson's does through the fairy tales or the Robber Queen folk tales, um, does that provide Tantan with more expertise, more experience, more authority to do what she does as the Robber Queen? Just a question, just a thought. Um, so go through and take a look. When we look at Midnight Robber by Nalo Hopkinson, what are some of those indigenous themes that we end up seeing in the text? So go ahead and you've read the book. Um, Go ahead and pause this and see if you can come up with a list. Okay, so hopefully you paused, hopefully you made a list. I actually did. So some of the indigenous themes that comes to my mind when I go through and read this novel is one, Tantan's origin story. As I mentioned, Tantan's origin story actually comes from the Taino tribe and is similar to the origin story that's told in Taino tribes and in the Taino tradition. Um, Once again, providing that origin story to Tantan, I believe does something for Tantan's character where she does gain more authority and she does gain a place and an understanding with the Duin people. Now, one of the other kind of indigenous themes that I caught up on is ethnobotany. So ethnobotany is traditional in most indigenous cultures where you actually use the local plants as for medicinal purposes, as pharmaceuticals. So we see this with some of the characters in the Tall People villages, but also when we end up following, well, kind of reading about Tantan in the bush with Chuchu Bud and Benta, we see this happening as well, where they actually use the land for everything, for not only sustenance, but for also any medical treatments or needs that they happen to have. Which does bring us to the Duin people. So the Duin people, well, their name is from the Tall People's kind of stories and Anansi stories or like little fairy tales that you tell kids. Um, their their lives are actually indigenous to that planet and to that land. So we can look at the Duins as kind of a representation of indigenous tribes. And what we see with the Duin people is that matching, is that similar, is that different from indigenous tribes as we know them in the Caribbean. So knowing the, let's see, the language difference, there is definitely a language difference, but notice that the Duin people know all of the tall people's languages because they taught themselves these things. They do the same thing with technology. Since the tall people won't actually give them the technology of cars or guns, etc., right? We read that foundry moment. um, they actually construct it and teach themselves and learn themselves so that they're able to have these relationships, to communicate, to not be taken advantage of in the way that Choo Choo Bed certainly fears. Um, their homes are actually in the bush. They're in the places where they're most comfortable. They're in nature. They have everything sustainable for them that they need there. Um, in the daddy tree, right, is where they live, where they work, where they do most of their homemaking, everything like that. Um, then I do also want to bring up this idea of secrets as protection, which is very interesting to me. That because of the amount of violence, right? We talked about this on Wednesday, because so many of these tribes were kind of wiped out by either other tribes or by the colonizers who came over, not having an identity, having that be secret, becomes an amount of protection. So the female Duans um, are silent, right? They're known as pack birds, and that's it. Instead of actually being like recognized as Hinty, as female Duans, um, they keep that part a secret. They keep their knowledge a secret. They keep their personalities a secret. They keep their relationships a secret. All of that so that they're just considered birds. And this becomes a protection for them, right? Um, well, tall people may, if you extrapolated it out, um, do something against doing people, knowing that the pack birds are just birds. They're not going to do something against the pack birds, um, which is an interesting kind of protection that you're able to give yourself, um, and that the Hinti do give themselves. So I am interested. On Wednesday, we will hopefully see what kind of list you came up with. Once again, anything that we consider a cultural aspect or a topic, anything culturally that has influence on the characters, these are topics that you could write about for your cultural connection papers. Um, all right, next time.